Hi.
I'm so happy that we were able to get together and one, we don't have the technical difficulties like we did the last time. I'm
Mm-hmm.
super excited about that.
Yes.
And also just really grateful for you and everyone who might be joining us or who might be catching this on the playback. So my name is Sequoia. I use she and her pronouns, and I am a wellness practitioner with my business, Red Animal Wellness and Consulting. Also an artist, and I wear many other different hats, but really excited for this particular offering and to partner with Kiana from the Yarn Mission. And I would love for you to introduce yourself and your offerings.
It's you and these fancy banners. Yes, Kiana, she, her pronouns. And it's so funny. I've been thinking a lot about like what I do, like, and how that impacts who I am, like starting in my new job and everything. And I'm like, okay, well, what does that mean? And right now it's just like a string of things that I feel called for and feel, good at, right?
Yeah.
And so I'm a researcher, an educator, and an abolitionist, which is I love that we're doing today because it's about care work. And not only do we deserve plenty of care, but we do care work in everything that we do. And so I'm super excited about that. And I come to y'all today ready to kind of really dive into the different ways that care can look like and the different ways that we can really center care as we move through spaces.
Nice. Thank you so much for that. Everything that you say resonates, especially around like not only like purpose, right? Like ensuring that the partnerships that I make and the things that I direct my energy towards are related to purpose, but then also how I identify so that other folks are not, identifying me.
Mm-hmm.
I was reading a post from one of my favorite authors, Nadia Corfor, and
Oh,
she was
mm-hmm.
talking about um, really the difference between like Afrofuturism and African futurism, and that she prefers
Oh.
to be identified as an African futurist, as being under the African Jujuism title, and like what the differences are for that. And so I was reading her blog on
Okay.
that. So it's really interesting to hear you talk about, identity. And she was saying, that it's really important for her to name herself and identify herself because her work doesn't fit under the Afrofuturist definitions, in her opinion, and how that is limiting to her. So I say all that to say, I think that these spaces where we listen to, process, creatively, uh, from others that have come before us related to navigating these same things. I think is really important and helpful and guiding many of us in this journey of naming ourselves and what that actually means and what our work is. You know, especially as like Black queer identified bodies
Yeah.
moving in these spaces. And so, yeah, just want to again say how grateful I am for this collab with you. And what are we doing here today? So this is our second live stream. The first one was on Charlene Carruthers and her body of work and a few other pieces. And then today's live stream is about Miss Major, who is an elder in the LGBTQ community. And we're going to be listening to her and a few other folks, as Kiana mentioned, related to care work. And this is really near and dear to my heart. And it's in alignment with Black August. principles related to action, but then also this piece around collective care, and also discipline. Discipline is like the main, kind of value, if you will, related to Black August. And one of the quotes that I shared for this particular one
Mhm.
was a podcast where Miriam Cobble was being interviewed, and the podcast is Beyond Prisons podcast. And the interview is named Hope as a Discipline. And so I really
Mhm.
feel, again, just aligned with um, the overlaps and the intersections of a lot of the work, but then also much of the audio that we're going to check out.
Yes, I love that, and yeah, she included that, podcast interview in, We Do This Till We Free, as Maram Kaba did, and so it's, I'm so glad that you helped us come back to that too. It's like actually has been a really powerful part of like how I move in and through liberation and such.
Mm,
Love it.
thank you for sharing that. Yeah, yeah, definitely. So, for folks, again, that are wondering how to engage with this space, so what's going to happen is we are going to play some audio, and throughout this session, you can be art making, that could be crocheting, knitting, you can journal, you can doodle, whatever your heart's desire, or you can just listen.
Yeah.
We'll share a little bit of reflection, processing of the audio pieces, and then we'll just do it all over again. And Kiana has been gracious enough to give us some reflection questions. So I'll put those up. So if you're someone who, again, is listening or wants to journal, there'll be processing questions. You can do a little bit of response art even to either the audio or the questions. And then we'll wrap up. If you haven't checked the first video, definitely check that one out again. That was related to Charlene Carruthers, and you can find those on Facebook, YouTube. I think that's all the announcements. Did I miss
I love it.
anything?
I think that sounds good to
Okay.
me. I
Okay.
did, I like wrote another blip about the ways that our art can be channeled through kind of the work, right? Like through our liberatory practices and like in these spaces. And so this time I talked more about the way that art and making is related to care, right? Like and
Mm,
I think there are people who have conversations about, well, what's art and what's craft and things like that. And um, you know, those conversations work in various spaces and whatever. But I think that we have not always recognized the art. So thinking about like Alice Walker,
mm,
um, and our mother's gardens, we haven't always recognized the art because it's been so practical. It's been so pragmatic. It's been so necessary, right? So sometimes the
mm,
care that comes through our arts and our making is around the space that we might build around it, right? So, like the yarn mission, we like to build spaces where we can make stuff together, and that space can be a space of care, but also it might just be what you want it to be used for, right? And that's
mhm,
legit and beautiful, and it channels really a long history of making, especially for Black folks and other
mhm.
um, like marginalized communities around the world. So I'm really excited, so excited.
Thank you. Thank you for that. At some point we gotta go back to something that you mentioned in the Charlene Carruthers listening session about radical knitting, radical art making. And one of the things that you mentioned in that, like, it reminded me of somatic work
Yeah.
and the connection to, using your hands or being in a process that helps, could be anxiety, could just be a need for grounding, and that connection to body work a little bit. So I greatly appreciated your reflection on that.
Thank you, and thanks
Yeah.
for that connection too. Because yeah, people have actually been doing a lot of, like, research on kind of the more somatic benefits of,
Hmm.
um, knitting as a practice and the ways that it can help, like, calm the body and stuff, and I think
Hmm.
folks have been doing a lot of, like, exploring and discussion and study around the ways that we can move trauma out of our bodies, and I wonder about, that as well. It's very
Definitely.
very interesting.
Definitely.
Fun. Okay. Should I
Definitely,
pull up our
definitely.
first?
I am grateful for you. Yeah, yeah. Yes, please. Definitely do that. I was just gonna share
Yeah.
one of the other reasons, in addition to, I just love hearing you, talk and share your perspectives on things, especially this topic. But that and I shared this in the last session as well, but that's one of the kind of connecting areas. I was so grateful for us connecting more like during the pandemic and getting more involved in the yarn mission and how impactful, you sending me knitting care packages and crocheting care packages and being a part of knitting circle. Like at that point in my life, there was just a lot of things going on, and being in that space and being able to, just be in community with you and you having that type of offering for me at that point helped me process, I think, more than you know. So
I appreciate it. I really do. And you know how I feel about you.
you know
Deeply,
how I
deep,
feel
deep,
about you.
deep, deep love, care, and
I appreciate
affection.
you. Okay, let's
So we
see.
get to start with bringing in Janet Mock. And it seemed to me like there's a documentary out and you can view it in parts, as well as a full documentary, but the way that it's on the website is nice because then I could find some parts that we could share in this space, but I would encourage folks to really dig deep and watch all of it. I pulled
Definitely.
two for today. I'm
Okay.
starting with, okay.
Ladies and gentlemen, Celebrity Grand Marshal Janet Mock. Make a round of applause for her.
Happy Pride. I said happy Pride. It is an honor to be here. It is an honor to stand witness to the greatness of San Francisco's trans, queer, bi, lesbian, and gay community. I'm in awe of this moment. I am in awe in how far we've come. I am in awe of the greatness of our community, a community whose roots are firmly planted in resilience. 45 years ago today, our forebears, gays and lesbians, low income queers, homeless youth, fly drag queens, and fierce trans women fought to live their lives openly, safely, and without restrictions. Legend says that in 1969, Marsha P. Johnson threw a Molotov cocktail
Oh no.
into the crowd, kicking off the Stonewall uprisings. Others say it was actually Sylvia Rivera throwing a brick at the police that served as a catalyst for our liberation. Regardless, it was unapologetic trans people who helped ignite our movement 45 years ago, and I am proud. I am proud. I am proud to be a product of their resilience, their fearlessness, and their brilliance. I am proud to be one of 5 grand marshals who are trans. From Jules Gutierrez and Chelsea Manning to Trans March and the legendary Miss Major Griffin Gracie. This action by SF Pride towards greater inclusion of trans people and people of color is a step in the right direction, a vital step that our national movement leaders must also take. We must realize, all of us must realize, that our own liberation lies in the survival and well-being of those most marginalized in our community. We are only free when all of our siblings are free. We are only free when all of our siblings are free, and our siblings may.
Oh, sorry, it keeps like buffering. But that's like when she says that is what was really like, oh, see, we channeling that through everything we do.
Not look like
Mhm.
us. Their genders may differ from ours. Whom they love may not be our thing. And how they see themselves may not align with our own experience, but they are valid and they are real and they are authentic, and we must fight for them just as much as we fight for our own liberation. You know, yesterday I was lucky enough to share an afternoon with Miss Major Griffin Gracie. I sat at her side yesterday and she told me about how proud she was that we would share this Grand Marshal moment together. I sat at her side as she told me about how excited she was to bring all of her girls with her. I sat at her side and realized that she was and has always been the answer. Miss Major has always been the truth. It was Miss Major who told me to never forget that I am trans, just as much as I am Black, just as much as I am a woman. It was Miss Intersectionality, honey, read it. It was Miss Major who taught me to center my sisters in my work. She has always centered us, those of us most forgotten by LGBT movement leaders. For decades, Miss Major, with little resources, no pay, or accolades, has taken care of our sisters behind bars, our sisters working on the streets, our sisters searching for families and mothers. She loves unconditionally and without judgment. She is the blueprint for our liberation and has ensured that the path that I walk on, that we all walk on, is less rocky because she exists. Today, we all stand proud on her shoulders. Without her work and the work of our forebears, from Sylvia Rivera and Marsha P. Johnson, Audre Lorde and Barbara Smith, Bayard Rustin and James Baldwin, without their audacity to be seen and to be heard, I would not and
Oh,
could not exist and thrive as a visible, vocal, young trans woman writer of color. This distinction as Grand Marshal is the product of their courage to fight back, from Stonewall and Compton's cafeteria to the streets that we all exist on today. We must never forget that Stonewall was not a parade, it was a police riot. We must never forget that whole communities of low income trans and queer folk were fighting for their lives that night, we must never forget that the legacy of survival and resilience and brilliance is so deep in our community, and that it goes beyond the soundbite of equality for all. A soundbite that allies throw around even though they're not conscious enough to realize that queer and trans folk exist in homelessness and joblessness, that our siblings are still fighting HIV AIDS, our sisters are still banished to the darkness of street corners, and that our people are still being locked away and hunted down. We must remember, we must remember, we must remember. The memories of this day, of all of you standing here, will serve as an enduring reminder of our legacy of resilience, of where we are now, and of how far we must move and journey together. Thank you. Happy Pride.
Oh, okay. I start pulling up the next one, but when I listen to it, it makes me. I keep thinking about the fact that we're in this time where, because of like survival and just like these systems of challenge, people are both lovingly told to focus only on themselves, as well as, um I know why we have those messages, and yet, just wholeheartedly, I'm like, no, right? Like, and not like we can't care for others to spite ourselves, of course, right? Which is not, I think, what they're worried about. But the caring for others and caring for our community as a whole, which is to me actually a little distinctive, and I'm excited for us to be able to talk about that, um, is is an important part of how we care for ourselves as well, actually.
Mhm.
And just can't be, I think we've gotten to a place where we have, well, I guess two things, where we have put people in such hard positions that we're making them choose, like where we're like, no, like you have this much energy, so use it only in this place, which I would argue allows for that same circumstance to perpetuate, but we're also, um, in this place where we w- well, I'll have to think about the other part again, but like
Okay.
we don't allow for the language for all of it either, right? We've
Mhm.
like demonized, and set those two things against each other. But
Mhm.
it's interesting.
Definitely. I think one of the takeaways for me, um, is this last quote that Janet Mock mentioned, which is, it wasn't a parade, it was a police riot. And, in a lot of the references to Stonewall, I appreciate, especially people of color, but then mostly like Black trans folks who are continuing to root that history in the truth. Like it reminds me of this fight about like critical race theory,
Mhm.
and this erasure of certain aspects,
Mhm.
of history. And so I just appreciate that constant reminder, like this wasn't this flowery corporate
Yes.
thing, like this
Yes.
was a fight. This was a fight or not only, rights, but what we kind of talked about before, representation, identity, survival, existence,
Mhm.
basic needs. Like this was a fight.
Yes.
So I appreciate that.
That yes, and that kind of that does it fully reminds me of because I think it fits. It's distracting us from that context so that then the onus is just on individuals, right? And so then it's like, well,
Mm-hmm.
you have to do all of this, right? Like this is you need to take care of yourself. You're the like, right? And it takes us away from, well, the systems are why I'm having to even like focus this way or do these things, right? I think, yeah, there's a lot of ways that through the retellings, the onus starts to shift, the framing starts to shift, what's highlighted, right? And so then, yeah, we're like, oh, well, I mean, people were really highlighting a lot of this stuff in um, with Pride always, and then now Juneteenth is really loud about it, like just like the commercialization of like actually powerful symbols and actually powerful language.
Mm-hmm.
But it gets all distorted and it doesn't have any of it lacks the power because it didn't have the context, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
I didn't
Mm-hmm.
ask to have plates that had my favorite quotes on them. I'm asking for people to actually navigate spaces and hold those quotes inside, like hold them as knowledges, right? And it's
Yes. Yes.
wild out there. People are wild.
Definitely. I mean, again, like I think that's why these types of remembering rituals is very important.
Yeah, I love it.
Mm-hmm.
This
Mm-hmm.
next one
Okay.
is a nice, it's a shorter clip from Minister Bobby Jean Baker, and she's talking about like kind of meeting Miss Major, and in this like just not even 3 minutes where that took her in the work. Um, so let's. They're like, oh, this is all better on two monitors. It's like, yeah, I know.
I met Miss Major in October of 2001 after being released from prison in Tennessee, and I moved to San Francisco and became a member of City of Refuge United Church of Christ. I want to thank Major for taking me as her grandchild. I was quite a cookie to be cracked at first, considering the many years of drug use, the many years of prison, the many years of criminalization, because I had a trust issue with people. And Major said, well, sooner or later, you're going to have to put the guns down. You're going to have to connect with community if you want to survive. For many years, even after I met Major, I'm like, why do you do this work? You've only been to jail once, because I had to do my history on who she was through the community as well as what's documented. And she said, because nobody else is doing it. And if we don't stand up for our community, nobody else will. She said, you never throw a girl under the bus. Never throw a girl under the bus. And I'm like, okay, well, why do I have to be involved? And for many years, many years, she said, you need to be involved. People need to hear your story. You've done this time. You didn't get cut up. You didn't get killed. You actually lived through your prison experience. And so I've taken on some of those characteristics within the church and in my work. And it's got me in trouble on several occasions. Several occasions feeding. I work with the homeless in one agency, and the man said, well, you're giving them too much food. And I'm like, well, we ain't gonna do them a throw it away anyway. Let's feed the people if we really gonna say we're about the business of feeding the people. And so I got that kind of liberation from Major, where if you're gonna do it, do it. But if you're not gonna do it, then step aside and let somebody else do it.
For me here, it reminds me like because I think we're often trying to figure out what our responsibility is, right? And like I already kind
Mm,
of said, onus. And here it's sounding like
mm,
maybe they're like maybe not. So maybe a little slight reframe. There's power in the survival, um, and some people definitely embody that as like a responsibility, right? Um, and I think that I'm thinking two big feelings. One is that, okay, like people can find different ways to navigate their own survival. And I'd like that for our folks, right? And maybe that looks like you're not actively part of the community, but then you wouldn't do harm, right? But we aren't in a context where we know how to do that by ourselves, right?
mm,
Like we have like so many messages indoctrinating and getting internalized all the time that to say, well, do you, but do no harm is like I don't think it means anything,
mhm,
right? Like, I don't think it's
mhm,
enough. I don't think it explains enough. I don't think it guides enough. And so then it feels really important that there are so many of
mhm,
us who do feel really actively called to like community and care and what that entails, because we're in a place where we all individually, but therefore collectively, need a lot of care.
mhm. Yeah, I appreciate your reflection on that, and this piece about do no harm and needing more understanding around that. You know, it is important to do political education around um, not only like the things that you're interested in, but also like what does harm mean?
Mhm.
Because it means different things to different people, or our understandings are different, right? Because our understandings of what harm is shaped on our individual experiences and
Mhm.
understandings. And so, you know, um,
Yeah.
I think, yeah, yeah, yeah. I think that's all I want to say about that.
That's legit. I mean, it's so important. I think recognizing how I think central, though I don't know if everyone automatically realizes it, but how central like harm and safety are to just everything that we're really trying to do, right? And then how much we vary in our understanding of that,
Mhm.
therefore. How much that can be influenced by so much of the stuff that causes harm and wants to keep causing harm that we actually have to like learn our like right like learn and grow through to be able to get to a place where we're like actually able to be really instrumental there. um
I agree. I agree with that. We can get in a lot of different conversations about the harm and safety piece, but I think this the conversations about like what is collective care, and collective care is definitely things like mutual aid and connection of resources and things like that, but also creating the spaces to understand, define, and identify what is harm and safety in a collective. Like that's a part of collective care too,
yep.
and taking the time to like slow down and resist urgency and to really work on those things or prioritize them above like I don't want to say above whatever the purpose is for the collective, but you have to prioritize those things, because if you don't, to me, that's white supremacy. Like that's what
Mhm.
capitalism is,
Mhm.
So
Yeah, I agree, and I love that because I do. So when I, because we were just talking about words and understandings. And so
Mhm.
sometimes when I'm hearing folks talk about like community care or collective care and stuff, um, I hear them talking about kind of those ways you check in with others, right? Those ways that you can show up and the ways that you can make space and the ways like and the tangible things you can do, right? For those in your circle or near to you. So like, you're realizing folks are struggling, you're sending them something tangible that can help them, your
Mhm.
things like
Mhm.
that, which is beautiful, right? But
Mhm.
it sometimes I don't always hear like you just so wonderfully did us taking that step to understanding that like that collective and community care is also trying to build and contribute to that community space. That means that we're not individually needing so much care, right? That's
Mhm.
like
Mhm.
shifting those contexts so that folks are collectively safer, more secure, right?
Mhm.
And that's what's I think is so beautiful. And when we think about um, all the things that Miss Major um, has done, is doing, will do, as well as a lot of other folks that are being channeled through these discussions, including Minister Bobby Jean. It's the ways that I believe they were really driven by like, how do we build this safer space, right? Um,
It's important. It's so,
yeah.
like I'm putting together I'm putting together something separate, but just even talking about this topic, reminds me of like this quote that kind of inspired this writing that I'm doing. But it says, and this came from a therapist off of TikTok, and her TikTok, I don't remember what her general TikTok was about, but this phrase she said, and it has just stuck with me, was we will not treat each other the way the state treats us,
Mhm.
and that is, I feel like that's in alignment, with this piece about slowing down around harm and safety and really understanding, and creating the space and
Mhm.
embodiment and things like that. So,
I've been well, because those are the conversations I love to have.
hmm
Um, but that I mean, it is amazing really the amount of how successful the state has been in stunting our dreaming around safety, right? Like it is the amount of times that I'm walking through like folks who are trying to be open, who are, really wanting to lean into the space and dream, and what they dream is a different state, right? Like a state that they're leading. Um, and it's really wild and it
hmm
deserves a lot of attention. It deserves a lot of attention and care just right there.
Oh,
Yeah, it's a lot. Okay, well, let's see. See, because I'm chatty. This is what happens. Like just chatty. I think we should listen to Miss Major, and
okay.
unfortunately, the guide, is like there, so folks can explore it and stuff more and stuff. But
hmm
that's what's fun to me.
Definitely. And what Kiana is mentioning is the Black Hawk is Listening Guide, and you can find that. I have it linked not only in the Facebook event, but then I think I linked it in my link tree. It should be in either the description box, the Facebook event, or whatever social media platform you're watching this on, wherever my links are at. Definitely check it out. It's an amazing guide where you get the playlist, reflection questions, intersections of art, Black queer feminist action steps.
Yes, thank you. Okay, so this comes to us from the LGBTQ&A podcast. And this was an interview that was done with Miss Major, where she really shares, I mean, a lot of wonderful information. They called it
Mm-hmm.
what the trans elder wants you to know. And so there are just all of these really wonderful parts of it. And honestly, I think we'll just start at the beginning and then we'll just stop at a point to be able to like help us
Okay.
segue in.
Okay.
The Stonewall Uprising, and
Okay, there we go.
Miss Major Griffin Gracie is a singular force in our community. She's a veteran of the Stonewall Uprising and has spent the 50 years since working and advocating for incarcerated trans folks, particularly trans women of color, who, like Miss Major was, are often housed in men's prisons. Major moved to New York City in the 60s, and when I think about the other trans women from that era, people we now consider to be legends, like Marsha P. Johnson and Sylvia Rivera, they weren't spoken about or celebrated in their lifetimes the way that they are today. So with Miss Major, who I also put in that category, I think we have an opportunity and an obligation to give her her flowers now, to celebrate her work and achievements right in front of her face. And as you're gonna hear today, Miss Major still has a great amount of wisdom left to impart. Today, Miss Major lives in Arkansas and is one of the executive producers of Trans in Shrumpland. That's a new docuseries that premieres this week and is available on streaming services like Topic and Amazon Prime. From The Advocate magazine in partnership with GLAAD, I'm Jeffrey Masters, and this is LGBTQ and A. I know that you had a stroke about a year and a half ago. How are you doing now?
I'm doing really well. I have to speak a little bit slower now. I have a problem getting around, but basically, I'm doing okay. Thank God for medicine.
I'm so happy to hear that.
Thank you.
Now, I want to go back to your early years for a moment. Growing up, you didn't have words like transgender. That wasn't anything in the public consciousness in any mainstream way. So early on, when it came to your femininity, how are you thinking about it? How are you interpreting those feelings?
You know, at the time, we weren't sure what we were. I did feel odd with my body, and dresses did feel comfortable. That's what it was. All of a sudden, dresses were important to me, and they were a lot easier to wear than pants.
And then you were 22, I believe, when you moved to New York City.
Yes.
How did you find trans community when you got there?
Are you kidding? Trans community was everywhere.
Really?
At the time, I went immediately to 42nd Street. Everybody went to 42nd Street. Trans girls, everybody. So meeting them was not a problem. They were everywhere. And then from there, I found an apartment and moved into that. And it was 6 floors of nothing but girls. It was fabulous.
All trans girls.
Yeah, everyone in the building. A certain comfort came with that. That kept me going. It was a full life, you know. You could have fun, and it was good being around people I felt connected to. I developed good friendships and stuff like that. Yeah, I felt a part of the world.
And some of the people that you knew back then were famous names that we know now, like Sylvia Rivera, Marsha P. Johnson, Crystal LaBeija. I know that you worked with Stormy DeLavier. Is it weird to look back and see that so many of these women that you knew have now gained icon status?
No, because they're just friends to me. They're not icons, you know. I don't know where that term came from, how we got stamped with it, you know. They're just friends. Even though it's happening and it has happened to me, you really don't pay attention to when it started. All of a sudden, it's, oh my God, there's this major, you know. Who, what, where, you know? Oh, me.
Well, I think that unlike those women, you have lived long enough to be celebrated in your lifetime. Do you feel like your work is acknowledged?
I do, in a sense of the community I'm from acknowledges me. The gay community doesn't. That's rather hurtful. They remember Sylvia and Martha loudly, and they forget about people who were incidental in that stuff. But that's
Mhm.
fine. You get used to that. It happens. Just go on and do what you have to do. Keep going forward.
Oh, I'm so sorry to hear that.
Well, it has to do with the time. A lot of people don't take the time to find out what started whatever happened, what was the importance of it. And they pick people in that they will admire. The fact that they admire those two, good. I'm glad that they do. They don't have to know all of us.
And back in the 60s, before Stonewall occurred, were you involved in activism then?
I was involved with it when my friend died, Puppy. She was murdered in her apartment by some man. We knew at the time in the community that someone who knew her had murdered her. And the police did not care. It didn't matter to them at all. And that was hurtful to us. And so that started my activism. Then I wanted to know what cars people were getting in, what the person looked like who they got in with, when they left and when they came back was important. And all of us started keeping notes up when it was to keep up with the John because we didn't know what would happen to us then.
And so back then, in order to keep yourself safe while you are doing sex work, were you learning by trial and error, or did somebody help you, teach you, or like mentor you in that way?
It was both. You learn things different than what someone tells you. You learn by trial and error, and you paid attention to what the girls tell you because you don't know it all. Nobody does.
And you've actually said that you loved doing it. You loved being a sex worker. What did you like about it?
The number of guys, the money, especially the money. I went into this because it was fun. Other girls went into it for survival, to make it. And I was lucky that I always worked. I got a job in social services at first and extra money from the job.
So with the apartment building that you were living in, the 6 floors of trans women, if you can like estimate like what percentage of them were also doing sex work?
All of us, but the whole building. One or two might not have been doing that, but all of us were. We had different hours, than somebody else, but all of us partook of that certain activity. Yeah.
And I guess what I'm getting at is like back then there were very few options for employment.
There were none really. You had to get a job in your male persona and hopefully work at that. That was all that we had. The entire building, except for maybe two people, would have to do that. It was hard, but I guess being around people who thought like you did made it seem possible. It made it worthwhile.
And so I mentioned Stonewall a little bit ago, and you were there the night of the uprising.
Yeah.
50 years later, what stands out in your memory of that night the most?
Well, I got knocked out early in it because I heard from the girls that you need to piss those guys off so that the police would knock you out and then you didn't get hurt. And so I was concerned with getting hurt, getting something broken or being bashed, where I could not work no more. So I spit in some guy's face and he knocked me out. That I remember. Other than that, I don't remember nothing.
So I've always heard that you were knocked out that night. I never knew that it was a decision that you made
Oh
that it would
yeah.
be safer to be knocked out.
Oh yeah. It was a decision because it was safer. It was safer. And it would have been if I'd stood and fought them. No, I'm not doing that. I was young and I was pretty and I want to get my face. So
I mean, there were so many laws against cross-dressing at that time. Were you like presenting as a woman that night?
yes, oh yes, always, please, Charles. But you had to have 3 articles of men's clothing on to let somebody know that you were a man. I wore a t-shirt under my blouse. I had a earring at the time that said I'm a man.
What was the third piece of clothing?
It was a pair of underwear.
Okay, it's a little bit harder to see.
Yeah. But that's what it was.
And so that was 1969. So much has changed since then for trans people, and so much still needs to change. But on an individual level, what has changed in your life?
Well, my life is better in general. I can shop. I can go about my day in whatever time I please, That has changed a lot. What hasn't changed is 1 or 2 people have an attitude about me. But with the way things have turned out, I don't care. They don't like me. Oh, well. And I'm going about my business. That's important.
You know, a consistent aspect of your life seems to be that you've always been this mother figure. You have kids, biological and chosen. Was it always important to you to be a mother?
No, in the beginning, I never thought I would be. But as time has evolved, that's a very sweet thing that they've done. Because when they asked me to do that, it means something to me that they've asked me.
When they ask you to be their mother?
The mother, yeah. Would you say no to something like that? It makes me feel good that they trust me enough to do that. I try to make sure that I don't let them down.
How many people call you mother?
Are you kidding? I can't count. I don't know.
Give me an estimate, like 20, 60.
An estimate, okay, of 100 people say to know me, 99 call me mother.
Okay, so I was a bit.
Sorry, I stopped. It's like so much about like the identity that we talked about. It made me like write down a few questions like, well, who are we? Who are
Mhm.
our folks, right? Which is what like Fannie Lou Hamer really checked in with people about, right? In terms of who do we hold ourselves accountable to? Who do we care for, right? Who is able to care for us? And how do we care for us, right? Recognizing that maybe we're not, not everyone is our folks immediately. How do we care for us in a way that doesn't increase the care others like us need, right? Different than
Mhm.
like the slightly different than like the how do we care, how do we do our stuff without causing harm for others, but how do we do our care in a way that doesn't increase the need of care for
Mhm.
others, right?
Mhm.
um,
Mhm.
and then thinking about then hearing Miss Major talk about her mothering as something others allowed her to do, like as like something that she sees how powerful that was for her in really doing for others, right?
Mhm.
um I always talk to my I would talk to my students about people have been sharing a lot of the like, well, check on your strong friends and the ones that are holding a lot, which is like legit, right? Like let's check in on our folks. But also I really want like I want us to ask for what we need, and like revel in that and like and in that I think it really honors the fact that there's so much love and care in letting others care for us too. It's a care for ourselves, but also a care for the communities we're building, right? Like
Mhm.
we're hopefully trying to model what's going on. And it's hard to say, well, I want us to care for each other, but not me. Right?
Yes, I chuckle at that, because as you're saying that, like I'm receiving I'm
We
receiving what you're saying, you know, especially about like ask for what you need. It can be hard,
so
because a lot of this is definitely just linked to trauma and socialization, but also the place that I return to as well is just embodiment practices,
mhm.
and that I that there are going to be moments where I do really good with saying what my needs are, and then there are going to be times that I do not so good with that,
Mhm.
and that's okay, you
Yes.
know. And that once I get ready to, or once I'm able to return back to that embodiment, like, I think about my yoga practice with that. Like, you can always return to the mat. Like, you can always return to, you know, um, yeah, just your embodiment practices, whatever that is.
Yeah, I mean, I appreciate that sharing. It is sometimes well, sometimes I hear and recognize through my own stuff that like grace has to also be really intentional, right? So then we're like, okay, well, this is what it should look like. And then we're like, oh, not doing that. What's wrong? And we're practicing, we're building things, right? And in a place that is not encouraging that growth,
Mhm,
right? Again, thinking about like the ways that we talk about care and self care. And then sometimes the ways that that completely neglects the fact that we're needing to squeeze in survival behaviors like basic need meeting, um, because of systems that really not beyond our control but that exist that shouldn't, right, that ought to be like collectively and diligently combated that aren't
mhm,
being,
mhm,
right. um, like it's wild. Someone had posted something, and they were like, "Why does this make me feel icky?" And it was this post that was supposed to be reminding folks who mother, and I of course think of that really inclusively,
mhm,
that their home um, is their priority, and that they don't need to, just get lost in their work. And on surface level, you're like, oh yeah, you're like helping folks realign. But when you're sitting in it, the onus is on how this individual views the different spaces they move through, right? The onus
mhm,
is not on the fact that capitalism puts us in a place where we're having to split ourselves so widely, and it doesn't even push for like an actual value to the
mhm,
various parts or allow a person to have agency to find what that looks like for them, right? And so this thing that's kind of like, oh, it's supposed to be comforting essentially, right? Like you're feeling torn, and that's because that's a really important space, and like you should focus on that. That is first right now. But it's like, mm, you could have cursed capitalism a little more in this. Like you could have like really pumped up our agency around what we're doing and how we do it, and the fact that all of it regardless should be valued pretty
mhm,
intensely. it's
mhm.
it's like that. I want to talk about that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That piece about what we value, what's valuable, you
hmm
know. Yeah, I have a lot of feelings about that.
It's hard. I I
So many
I
feelings.
I feel like it's not even something I have like answers for, right? Because it's
Mhm,
so
mhm,
easy, and like, well, because we're navigating capitalism, right? So like um part of when we're saying, well, value this within the system that capitalism is here, and we do need to like literally survive. um it still should include that in the discussion. um and so like, like I would never, not never consider like um reprimanding or like censuring someone, a marginalized person, a multiply marginalized person from like suggesting that they deserve pay for things, right? Like that's part
Mhm.
of the value. And I would always push for us to like keep expanding and keep recognizing that that's where we are now, but I don't want to be here forever. And
Mhm.
so when we're not here, there's still ways to show value and to really like show investment outside of like, capitalistic
Mhm.
investment. But it's
Mhm.
big and it's hard, and it makes me think of like the Afrofuturism, and maybe also then the African futurism in terms
Mhm.
of um, what are we even able to imagine from the places that we are, which is what I imagine, like what Alexis Pauline Gumbs talks about so much and so beautifully, is just like thinking about like I think when she was talking about black speculative fiction, and she says, "Well, you go to as far as you can imagine, and then you stand there and you imagine what you can't, right? Like you imagine
Yeah.
what would be beyond that." And it's like, oh, thinking about so many feelings. And sometimes it's like really like lifting. Sometimes it's really scary. Sometimes it's like
Mhm.
makes you anxious. Me.
Mhm. 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 Definitely. It's that unknown.
Hmm.
It's that unknown. I think a lot of that, again, is wrapped up in, topics about trauma and change. And, that's what keeps us from being able to do a lot of those things, is not knowing what's on the other side. And it's like, you don't have to know.
Right.
You have to just know that you're going to be okay and you're going to, be provided for.
Yeah, that's such a beautiful way for us to go with this, because that's what I think we're trying to create for people, right? Like
Mm,
um because I know from the works that we do, and the ways that we move, like we want to like be part of spaces that are learning and growing together. We also don't spend all of our time professing to know everything. I think
mhm,
I've been calling it lately like building safe places to land, right? Like just letting people have safe, soft spaces to just land on and to move from, as we're all trying different things. And when I think about like hope being a discipline, there is something
mhm,
wrapped up in like a confidence there, right? Like, and for me, it's easiest to think about when I'm thinking about the fact that like I don't, no part of me doubts your power and like the like amazing impact that you have in the spaces around you and beyond you, right? Like, and when I think about the folks in our spaces and in our communities, like I feel similarly. I'm like, there's no part of me that would ever be like, nah, I don't think you got this, right? And like, therefore, we're doing things. Like there are
mhm,
things happening. There's there has to be like this level of understanding and acceptance of the fact that we've got this, right?
mhm.
Like it's there are so many beautiful, wonderful, and capable people doing so many beautiful, wonderful, and like great things. That beautiful things are constantly coming from it. Um, it's it's about being able to hold all of those things in the same place and time, and that's what I think we're working on.
I love that.
It's
I
fun.
don't got nothing else to say. Yeah, I love that.
I'm so glad we got to do this.
Me
Thank you
too.
so
Me
much.
too.
You're just like, I want to do something. I was like, okay, what are you thinking? And look at it.
Definitely. Oh my gosh, it was such a pleasure. Yeah, I think I definitely just want to bring folks' attention to the listening guide as well, because the action steps that you have on there are just amazing. For Miss Major's listening guide, Kiana put on there link Miss Major's study guide, and then for Charlene Carruthers during that listening session, one of the action steps was the Barbara Smith Caring Circle on Patreon that I think is extremely important, especially as we talk about Black elders in the community and ways to support them.
Yeah.
And there are a few other action steps as well, so definitely check out that link. Um, yeah, I don't know. I would love to do this again. So we'll see what's gonna happen. But
Yes.
this was amazing for Black August.
Yes, and I think one of my dreams is that we can, share the video so folks can engage outside of the space as well. And I'd love to see
Hmm.
what folks are thinking and making around some of these topics. I love to see the connections people are noticing around them as they've like given some intentional space. Because right, like the care
I love that.
and the intentional like moving through lens and what community and collective means it's so loud through
Hmm.
everything. And so I
Hmm.
think giving it all space really helps us to kind of sort the things in and draw those lines. So,
I agree.
yay.
I agree. Do you, speaking of sharing, the last time we shared, just what we were working on. Did you want to share what you
Sure.
worked on? Okay.
I so because I needed a calm place to land. So I didn't go drag out my yarn, but I did just like mind map a little. I wrote down some of
Nice.
the quotes that were coming out. I started going
Hmm.
through and like doing little doodles in the spaces, and I wrote proud really big because I was like, you know, I'm not sure that we've even placed a lot of value on the caring for, right?
Hmm.
And that maybe that's like I'd like to really feel really proud of caring for others so strongly and
Hmm.
not feel kind of that like guilt and shame when it's like pitted against my caring for myself, right?
Hmm.
And so I think that felt really loud and really really central for me, though I put it off center on my paper.
Cool. Nice. Nice. Let's see. I just doodled as well. And not really mind mapping, but just a little bit of a doodle and some quotes.
Mhm.
I don't know if
Oh,
you
look
can
at that.
see that. Just some little abstract
Love.
doodles and circles and some quotes. Um, and let me see. Okay, let me one thing at a time. So with my doodles, just really thinking about um one of the reasons that I enjoy doing abstract doodles a lot of the times is that interwoven, not really knowing where things end and kind of begin visual. And I think caring for the self is resonates for me with that in some kind of way. And then just thinking about like some of the kind of quotes that I wrote down. I had some questions that came up, but then I mentioned a remembering ritual,
Mm,
and I think that I don't know, I just love that.
mm,
Um, yeah, because it definitely connects with just this cute and data practice related to soul retrieval. And, that remembering is so integral in trauma work and, reconnecting with the self and grounding. Um, and so, yeah, anytime that I can engage in anything like that is super important. Um, I I also just wanted to highlight Biani. I don't know if Biani is still here, but they were, and I just wanted to highlight what they said about knitting. So I've been wanting to learn how to knit. It makes sense that it is a powerful healing tool. So just wanted to, acknowledge that comment.
we can do that. That is
Yeah.
what we can do. um, we are the Yarn Mission is really working on just kind of building those spaces again and building them in new and creative ways that because like I think in a beautiful and powerful and like embodied way, the pandemic reminds us that like we should work within our capacity and within what feels safe and secure.
Mhm.
And it really, I think, encourages a space for adaptation and growth. And so just, yeah, please follow somewhere and, we can definitely make that happen. I want
I love
I
that.
want everyone to learn to knit. Like I know I just said that not everything has answers and da 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 da. No, that's true. And I would love tons of people to join us in knitting. I spent this whole time like not I it was only on the private chat. I was like, "Oh, no comments." I don't know why technology is a challenge for me.
It's fine. It's fine. All right. This was amazing. I, yeah, I just greatly appreciate you. You all can find, Kiana just mentioned where to find her and the Yarn Mission. You can find me across the socials, at Red Linen Moon Wellness and Consulting. Um, I'm on all the things. And definitely just keep in touch, stay in touch so that you know what offering we have next. And
Yeah, and tag us
yeah,
if you share anything out that
yeah,
comes from this or relates to this. I'd love to see it.
yes, 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 yes. Definitely do that. Definitely do that. All
Mm.
right. This was
Powerful
a
Black
beautiful
August,
Sunday.
everyone. Yes, it is.
Thank you for saying that. Okay. I'll talk to you soon.
Bye.